Ever feel like, despite everything we know, all the progress we've supposedly made, we're still struggling? Struggling to find genuine happiness or struggling to live peacefully together, maybe even struggling just to look after our planet. What if the real root cause, the fundamental issue, isn't actually out there somewhere, but it comes from a really deep misunderstanding, a misunderstanding of ourselves and the very nature of the world around us?
Well, we've got this really fascinating text in front of us today. It's an introduction to something called Jeevan Vidya. And this isn't just like abstract philosophy sitting on a shelf. It's presented through the very personal, pretty tenacious journey of someone who really dared to question everything. I mean, from the ancient scriptures and the deep family traditions he grew up with, all the way to the promises of modern science, even the political systems he watched being built around him. His was this lifelong, really persistent search for truth and for some kind of resolution to the basic problems of being human. So our mission in this deep dive is really to pull out the core insights from this text.
We're going to explore its unique perspective on existence, on consciousness, and what it really means to be human. We'll definitely dig into its, let's say, sharp critique of our current, prevailing systems. And then we'll uncover the path it proposes, this way of Jeevan Vidya, towards resolution, towards continuous happiness, and living a genuinely humane way of life. So yeah, get ready for some maybe surprising facts and perhaps even a few aha moments as we unpack all this quite complex material. Okay, so our journey into this deep dive, sort of following the path laid out in the text, it really kicks off with this profound sense of dissatisfaction that the author apparently felt from a really young age. He describes this misery, this deep unease, as coming from two main sources, two things that just wouldn't let go, these points of tension he couldn't seem to square with what he was seeing in the world and feeling inside himself. The first one came from seeing these inherent contradictions, between the dictates, the rules, the traditions passed down through generations, and the actual reality he saw people living around him. But it wasn't just about disagreeing. He felt he couldn't just negate that tradition, dismiss those beliefs, because at the same time he felt he hadn't fully understood them himself. You see the bind.
Right, that's a really crucial point. It wasn't just teenage angst or wanting to throw off authority. It was a genuine, deep-seated intellectual and, you could say, existential struggle with the beliefs and traditions he was swimming in. There was this real, palpable need to comprehend them, to get to the bottom of them, to truly understand what they were about, rather than just blindly following the rules or doing the rituals out of, fear or expectation.
Yeah, exactly. And this internal conflict was obvious. His elders, seeing him question things, they understandably got worried about him diverging from the path. So they urged him, study the Vedas, especially Vedanta, study the other scriptures. They believed the answers, the resolution he was seeking must be in there somewhere within that huge body of ancient knowledge.
And the text actually outlines that traditional structure of Vedic knowledge they pointed him towards. It's usually broken down into three main parts. First, you've got the Karma Kanda. This describes actions, or karma, based on the Vedic view specifically, actions that are supposed to lead you to heaven after you die. Then there's the Upasana Kanda, which is more focused on rituals, ceremonies, devotion. Basically, practices aimed at becoming like the gods and goddesses mentioned in the scriptures. And finally, the Gyan Kanda. This part asserts that knowledge, specifically supreme knowledge, what they call Brahman Gyan, is the ultimate goal. That's supposed to be the pinnacle.
Right, so he follows their advice, dives into this path of knowledge, the Gyan Kanda, looking for that ultimate wisdom. But when he asked the really basic, seemingly simple question, okay, but what is knowledge? The answer he kept getting back was, knowledge is knowledge of Brahman. Okay, so next logical step, well, what is Brahman? And the response he got again and again, which must have been incredibly frustrating, was, it is beyond your comprehension.
Uh-huh. And you can see the problem immediately. For someone who's driven by the need to comprehend, it's a paradox, right? How on earth can you realize something, truly grasp it, experience it, if you're told right at the start that it's fundamentally beyond your ability to understand? It doesn't compute.
Exactly. It's a total dead end if you're looking for understanding. So the elders' answer to this logical knot was basically to double down. They stressed the importance of just adhering to the dictates, follow the rules and sanctions in the scriptures. They assured him that realization, specifically realizing Brahman, happens in this special state called samadhi, a state of deep meditation or absorption.
Yeah, the idea was that in samadhi, you'd just get the answers automatically. No prior comprehension needed. It would all just become clear.
So for him, faced with this logical brick wall and the lack of any understandable answers coming from his studies, the conclusion felt unavoidable. He thought, okay, I must see this state of samadhi for myself. It felt like the only option left. Arguing didn't work, agreeing didn't work. He had to experience it directly.
And that really brings up a critical point in his whole quest, doesn't it? Is genuine realization, true understanding, even possible without some basis of comprehension? The traditional path, at least as it was presented to him, seemed to sort of bypass intellectual understanding.
Yeah.
It prioritized faith, strict adherence to rules, and chasing these altered states like samadhi, where answers were just supposed to magically appear.
Yeah, and the fact that he couldn't get satisfying, understandable answers, even from the most learned scholars in his own family, people deeply versed in Vedanta, even after he diligently studied it like they told him to, that became what the text calls his first failure.
It really highlighted a fundamental gap or maybe a flaw in the knowledge framework he was working within. It led to these paradoxes and seemed to value mystical experience over, comprehensible, shareable reality.
And that wasn't the only thing causing this deep-seated pain, this dissatisfaction he felt. There was a second major source. This one came from observing changes in people he knew or people he watched from afar, particularly after they achieved what the world considers success. He watched as individuals got positions of power or influence or status, and he saw something shift in their character, something that really disturbed him.
Like they lost something essential.
Exactly. Something about being a fundamentally right human being, as he put it. This observation really sharpened, became more urgent for Hare after India gained independence and the constitution was being framed. He apparently followed all the newspaper reports, the public debates, listened to the leaders discussing how this new nation should be structured. And by 1950, after soaking all that in the debates, the discussions, what was actually being written into law, he came to this pretty stark conclusion. He concluded that it was fundamentally impossible to evaluate a right human being under this new constitutional setup.
Wow, that's a really profound critique, isn't it? It's not just knocking the old spiritual ways, but also the brand new, supposedly modern political and legal systems. It suggests that even these frameworks, with all their stated aims of justice and order, were just insufficient. They couldn't define or foster or even really evaluate what it means to be a truly right human being, someone with integrity, solid character, humane conduct.
Yeah, his deep search for some kind of fundamental, universal understanding of human character, the basis for right living, it just wasn't being met. Not by the ancient doctrines and not by the new secular governance models either.
So you can see how that would leave him feeling pretty disillusioned with both sides, right? And it fueled this need to search for something different, something more fundamental altogether.
So, okay. Traditional spiritual paths, they weren't giving him comprehensible answers. Modern political frameworks, they seemed inadequate for defining true human character or solving basic problems. Where you go from there? For the author, Samadhi, despite his earlier frustrations with the whole concept, it kind of became the last big hope on the horizon.
Like a final resort, almost.
Pretty much. He felt he had to pursue it just to see if this promised state really did hold the key, the understanding he was so desperately seeking. So he and his wife decided to go to Amarkantak. They'd heard it was a sacred place, the source of the Narmada River. Thinking this was maybe their last significant attempt to find truth through the traditional routes, they arrived there in 1950. And once he got there, he started a dedicated spiritual practice. Specifically, he used the Agam Tantra Upasana method.
Yes, that's one of the methods described in some scriptures for reaching samadhi. It involves visualizing gods and goddesses in different parts of your own body, right?
Yes.
Seeing them in your imagination and then worshiping based on that vision.
Exactly. And he apparently threw himself into this practice intensely. He dedicated himself to it and waited, the text says, for a full year, fully expecting that the promised realization, or at least some definitive answers, would finally arrive.
What happened? The source describes this huge, dedicated effort as, well, a second failure.
Another dead end.
Seems like it. Even after a year of intense practice, and he was apparently confident he had achieved a state of samadhi, as it was traditionally understood, he still didn't find the fundamental answers he was looking for. This just compounded his earlier disappointment with Vedanta and the scholars. Now, even samadhi itself, the state that was hyped as the ultimate source of answers and realization, it yielded nothing he could clearly articulate, understand, or apply.
Wow. So that posed a whole new problem, didn't it?
A critical one. How could he possibly describe this state? How could he testify to having reached it? What evidence could he offer that would mean anything outside of that subjective experience?
Yeah, how do you prove it or share it if there's nothing describable?
Exactly. The text is very clear. There was nothing in this state which could be described, nothing communicable, nothing testable by the world's standards. So this experience really drove home the limitation, the sort of elusive nature of those traditional mystical states, especially when you're holding them up to a standard of wanting comprehensible, verifiable understanding that could actually help everyone.
So, faced with that profound disappointment, I mean, even the highest state promised by traditional spirituality, samadhi, gives no describable answers to his core questions about existence and being human. This is where the story takes a really remarkable, kind of unexpected turn. Instead of just giving up, throwing his hands up, he decided to take the samadhi state he felt he'd attained and actually test it.
Test samadhi. How?
Well, he improvised. He came up with a method based on the concept of sanyam. Now, sanyam is mentioned in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra.
Right. Patanjali defines it as bringing together dharana, concentration, dhyan, meditation, and samadhi absorption, all focused on one single object or point.
Exactly. But the author notes that whatever was traditionally written about sanyam, based on that definition, it wasn't acceptable to him. Maybe because it still didn't address his core need for understandable, verifiable knowledge and evidence. So get this. Here's where it gets really interesting. He completely reversed the prescribed order.
Reversed it.
Instead of concentrating, then meditating, then reaching samadhi, he started from the state of samadhi he believed he was in, then moved to dhyan, meditation, and then finally to dharana, concentration. Backwards.
Wow. Starting from samadhi and working back, that's unconventional, to say the least.
Totally improvised.
And that specific reversal, that improvised method, seems to have been the absolute key that unlocked everything for him. What's fascinating here isn't just that it was a different technique. It seems to have produced a radically different kind of outcome compared to what people usually report from traditional samadhi.
Well,
the text says, as a direct result of this reverse sanyam, he started seeing. It immediately clarifies, seeing here means understanding. He started understanding each and every bit of existence in front of me.
So not like a mystical vision, but actual comprehension.
Exactly. It wasn't a fleeting image or an indescribable feeling. It was a profound, comprehensive, and crucially understandable grasp of reality itself. He saw the whole sequence of emergence from an atom till this earth. He understood the fundamental order of existence and the way of its working.
That sounds like the breakthrough he'd been searching for his entire life.
Precisely. This, the text presents, was it not a mystical state in the old sense, but a fundamental, verifiable comprehension of the reality and existence. And importantly, he frames this discovery, this wisdom, not just as his own individual achievement after all that struggle.
Right, he mentioned something about collective effort.
Yes, he presents it as a result of the collective effort for good by all humankind in their history, as if this universal knowledge was always there, latent, waiting to be accessed, and his unique, persistent quest, born from that deep dissatisfaction, finally unlocked the door, making it available for humanity's future well-being and resolution.
Okay, so after this incredible breakthrough, this shift from traditional, indescribable samadhi to this state of profound, understandable seeing or comprehension, what did it actually reveal about existence itself? What's the fundamental reality that became clear?
Well, the absolute core understanding, the bedrock truth that was revealed is simply this. Existence is coexistence.
Existence is coexistence. Not just that things coexist sometimes, but that's its fundamental nature.
Exactly. It's not a collection of separate, isolated things bumping into each other occasionally. Everything exists together, fundamentally, inherently, in this state of pervasive harmony and interconnectedness. And the foundational concept the text uses to explain this is described as nature saturated in the omnipotence.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase. Nature saturated in the omnipotence. What does omnipotence mean here?
Omnipotence in this context refers to the omnipresent, all-pervasive reality that literally saturates everything that exists. The text also calls it space, or sata, or paramatma, sometimes even God, but it's described not as an empty void, but as an absolute, all-encompassing energy. It's uniformly present everywhere, always.
Like the fundamental background radiation of reality.
Kinda, but maybe even more fundamental. It's presented as the very first reality that human cognition even encounters. The text emphasizes you have to recognize space even to know that you exist or that other people exist. Without the space between things, between units, you couldn't even perceive them as distinct entities.
Right, that makes sense. So how does this pervasive space, this omnipotence, relate to all the individual things, the units as the text calls them, atoms, molecules, planets, us?
That relationship is described very specifically. All units, from the tiniest subatomic particles up to galaxies, are described as being submerged, encircled, and imbued in this space.
Submerged, encircled, and imbued. So they're not just in space like objects in a box.
No, that's a key distinction from a purely materialistic view, where an object might displace the space it occupies. Here, units exist within this all-pervading space, and they aren't just passively sitting there. These units are energized, they're active, they're inspired in the omnipotence, they exist in a state of free suspension.
Free suspension, meaning?
Meaning there's no inherent attraction or repulsion between a unit and the space itself. Space doesn't pull things in or push them away. Yet paradoxically, this same space is the fundamental basis for both the composition of units, how they form and hold together, and their decomposition, how they break down or change.
How can it be both the container and the basis for change?
Because it's permeable. It's everywhere. This pervasive nature means all units are constantly active, constantly interacting with each other within space, and they are inherently regulated by this omnipresent reality. Furthermore, the text says units are illumined from infinite angles of their mutuality. That's a powerful image suggesting their dynamic interconnectedness. Their very nature is defined by their relationships with everything else within this encompassing space.
Wow, that paints a picture of the universe that's, well, fundamentally orderly and interconnected, not chaotic or random at all.
Precisely. It's a vision of inherent order. And building on that, the source identifies 4 distinct orders of nature that exist within this fundamental coexistence.
Okay, what are the 4 orders?
First, there's the material order. This includes things like soils, rocks, metals, air, water, the basic physical stuff. These things exhibit what's called definite conduct. They behave in predictable, inherent ways based on their physical properties.
Like a rock is always a rock, water is always water.
Pretty much, yeah. Second is the bio-order, which is all the plants and vegetation. They're characterized by seed inheritance. A seed grows into the same kind of plant and the process of growth and decay.
Got it. Material, bio. What's third?
Third is the animal order. This refers to animal bodies and their behavior. They are regulated primarily by species inheritance. Dogs have puppies, cats have kittens, and they're driven mainly by sensitiveness, their sensory experiences and instincts.
Okay, makes sense. And the fourth?
The fourth is the knowledge order, or simply the human order. That's us, the human being.
And what makes the human order distinct?
It's unique in a couple of ways, according to the text. Firstly, it's sanskar inheritance, the passing down of values, thoughts, desires, habits through culture and tradition, not just genetics. And secondly, and this is absolutely crucial, the human order has a fundamental need for wisdom, for understanding, in order to live in order itself.
Ah, so the first 3 orders are inherently orderly, but humans need something extra.
Exactly. That's a key point. If you connect this to the bigger picture, the text argues that the material, bio, and animal orders are inherently in order. They function according to their nature, their definite conduct, and crucially, they are complementary to each other. They naturally participate in the larger coexistential harmony without needing to consciously figure it out.
They just fit together.
Right. But the human order is presented differently. It's the only order that needs wisdom, which means understanding existence as coexistence and living according to that understanding to find its own order and, importantly, to become complementary to the rest of nature.
And if we don't have that wisdom,
Then we get, well, what we see. Unwisdom. The lack of this understanding in humans is explicitly identified as the root cause of all untoward events in human history.
all of them. That's a strong claim.
It is. It includes not just conflict between humans, wars, crime, exploitation, but also the immense environmental damage humans have caused. The source makes a really powerful contrast here. It says the rest of nature has no conflict, no revolt, mutual complementariness. It highlights how profoundly the human species has deviated from this natural coexistential state, and it blames that deviation squarely on our lack of understanding, our lack of wisdom.
Okay, so this deep dive into existence as coexistence inevitably leads to a clearer and maybe quite different understanding of the human being itself. How does the text define us?
It offers a really crucial insight here. It clarifies that a human being isn't just a physical body walking around. A human being is a combined form of Jeevan and body.
Jeevan. What is Jeevan?
Jeevan is the conscious entity within the human being. It's described very specifically as a constitutionally complete atom. Think of it as the self, the consciousness, the I that experiences.
So Jeevan is the consciousness, and it's distinct from the physical body.
Yes, fundamentally distinct. And crucially, Jeevan exists naturally. It's not something humans create or contribute to. It's part of the fabric of existence. The human body, on the other hand, is presented as a contribution of human tradition. It comes about through generations of procreation and development.
And why do we need the body then, according to this view?
The body is needed by Jeevan, specifically for evidencing its awakening. It's the vehicle through which Jeevan can express consciousness, understanding, and wisdom within the material world, within human society.
Okay, Jeevan is the conscious self, distinct from the body. But how can we know that? How can we recognize this distinction ourselves? Does the text offer any way to verify this?
It does, actually, and it's quite elegant because it points directly to our own lived experience. It provides a very clear, practical way for anyone to recognize that Jeevan is distinct. It points out this: no part of body is an anticipation or expectation of justice, nyaya, dharma, order, or truth, satya, while we expect and anticipate justice, dharma, and truth from every human being.
Ah, that's interesting. So my hand doesn't care about justice. My liver isn't seeking truth.
Exactly. Your physical body parts, your organs, your cells, they operate based on physical and biological laws and processes. They don't have expectations about fairness or universal order or ultimate reality. Yet as human beings, we constantly expect justice in our dealings with others. We inherently seek truth about how things work. We desire order in our lives and in society.
So that very expectation, that seeking, points to something beyond the physical.
Precisely. That discrepancy, the body's indifference, versus our innate seeking for justice, dharma, and truth, indicates the presence of something more than just the physical machinery. It points to that conscious entity, the Jeevan, which is capable of recognizing the need for and longing for these higher concepts. It's presented as direct evidence observable within ourselves for consciousness being distinct from the body.
Okay, so this Jeevan, this conscious entity, it's not just passively observing, it has activities.
Oh yes, absolutely. Jeevan is dynamic. It has inherent powers and activities, which the text details quite specifically as the activities of consciousness. It outlines 10 key activities, operating at different levels or depths within Jeevan. These are often grouped into 4 main functional levels.
What are those levels?
First, there's Mun. This level handles the activities of taste, meaning liking and disliking and selection, which is choosing based on those likes and dislikes. It's about our immediate preferences and choices.
Okay, Mun, taste and selection. What's next?
Next is Vritti. This level is responsible for analysis, breaking things down mentally, and evaluation, which is assessing the value or significance of something. It's about processing information and making judgments.
Analysis and evaluation. Deeper than just liking, disliking.
Then, third is Buddhi. This is where higher cognitive functions reside. It includes visualization, forming mental images, thinking, processing thoughts and concepts, understanding, grasping the meaning and purpose of things, and conviction, forming firm beliefs based on that understanding.
Visualization, thinking, understanding, conviction. That sounds like the core of our mental life. And the fourth level.
The fourth and deepest level described is Atma. This relates to realization, experiencing truth directly. That anicca state we discussed earlier, and balance, which means remaining undisturbed and stable internally, grounded in that realization.
Realization and balance, the deepest core. And all these 10 activities together make up consciousness.
Yes, these 10 activities collectively constitute the activities of consciousness, or sanchetna. And consciousness itself is understood as a combination of 2 fundamental capacities: intelligence, sangyanshilta, which is the capacity to know and believe, and sensitiveness, samvedanshilta, which is the capacity to recognize and respond.
Intelligence and sensitiveness, knowing, believing versus recognizing, responding. How does the interplay between those lead to, like, human fulfillment or happiness?
That's a crucial question, and understanding that dynamic is key to grasping the human condition, according to Jeevan Vidya. The source explains that sensitiveness, the capacity to recognize external stimuli, internal sensations, and respond accordingly, is something we share with other orders of nature, especially the animal order.
Right, animals react to sensations.
Exactly, and living primarily based on sensitiveness, focusing just on sensory inputs and immediate responses, leads only to temporary gratification. Think about the pleasure of eating, the relief of sleeping, enjoying nice music.
They feel good, but they don't last.
Precisely. They're inherently transient, they fade, they need to be repeated, they constantly change. You can't build continuous happiness on sensory pleasure alone. Intelligence, however, is presented as unique to human beings. It's the capacity for knowing and believing, for understanding purpose, universal principles, the nature of reality itself.
So intelligence goes beyond just reacting.
Yes. And the text describes the inherent brittleness of sensitiveness. The fact that sensory gratification is never lasting, never fully satisfying, not as a flaw, but actually as a vital signal. It's an alarm for human beings awakening.
An alarm? How so?
It serves as an inspiration and direction. The constant dissatisfaction or fleeting nature of purely sensory-based living pushes us, or should push us, towards seeking something more stable, something continuous. And that continuous happiness, the text argues, can only be found through the activities of intelligence, through knowing, believing, understanding reality, and living based on that wisdom.
Okay, so putting that together, human beings have these four core activities happening all the time. Knowing, believing, recognizing, and responding.
That's the fundamental operational loop, yes.
And while recognizing and responding are shared to different degrees with other things in nature, it's the knowing and believing part that's uniquely human and absolutely critical for understanding purpose.
Exactly. Knowing and believing are key to understanding why we exist, what the purpose of existence is, and what our own purpose is within that larger context.
And it's only by knowing and believing purpose that we become truly social, truly capable of continuous fulfillment.
That's the argument. Fulfillment comes naturally when our recognizing and responding, our actions, our interactions, our choices are grounded in and guided by that foundation of knowing and believing purpose, understanding the reality of coexistence.
And without that foundation, if we're just operating based on sensation or confused beliefs,
Then the text describes the human condition quite starkly as wretched, characterized by a lack of direction, internal conflict, confusion, endless struggle, deep-seated problems, anxiety. Essentially, living in illusion, regardless of any external achievements or possessions.
Okay, so based on this whole framework, existence as coexistence, human being as Jeevan plus body, the need for wisdom over just sensitiveness, the text then offers a really strong, pretty comprehensive critique of the systems and ideologies that dominate our modern world.
Yes, it really doesn't pull any punches when looking at prevailing systems through this lens.
Take modern education, for example, the very system designed to enlighten us. It's described as fundamentally failing to produce moral, cultured, truly humane beings.
And why does it fail?
Yeah.
According to the text.
The reason given is that its core content, and the text is quite pointed here, calling it sex-obsessed psychology, consumption-obsessed sociology, and profit-obsessed economics, completely lacks any correlation with what parents deep down expect for their children's character. And more fundamentally, it lacks correlation with the actual purpose of human life, which is understanding and living in coexistence.
So the content itself is seen as misguided.
Deeply misguided. The text argues it's precisely through this kind of education, focused on the body and external achievements, that unwisdom gets passed down, flowing into human tradition generation after generation, and essentially perpetuating the very problems we're trying to solve.
That's a heavy critique. So if education isn't leading towards wisdom and humane character, what is it producing, according to this view?
Well, the argument is that it primarily teaches people to live with reference to the body. The focus becomes physical needs, sensory gratification, external validation, competition, accumulation.
Which leads to those obsessions mentioned.
Exactly. Obsessions for profit, for sensual pleasure, represented by sex in that critique, for endless consumption. This relentless focus on the body and the external world just perpetuates illusion about where true happiness and purpose lie.
And the outcome of this kind of education.
The text argues it creates individuals who, because they lack a true understanding of their inner being, Jeevan, their purpose and their fundamental interconnectedness, ultimately become burdens. Burdens on others through exploitation or unmet expectations, and burdens on the earth itself through unsustainable consumption and demanding behavior.
There's a real irony pointed out there, isn't there? Parents send kids to school hoping they'll become good, decent human beings.
And the system itself, with its underlying philosophy and content, often works directly against that hope. It's quite a sobering thought. And what about science? Science is often held up as our best hope, the peak of human knowledge and problem solving. Does it escape critique?
Not entirely, no. The text doesn't dismiss scientific inquiry itself, but it sharply critiques how science operates and the consequences it has when divorced from wisdom and a holistic understanding of existence.
Oh, so?
Well, for one, it criticizes science for often blaming either human nature or the environment itself for problems that, the text argues, are actually caused by human actions driven by unwisdom, not by some inherent flaw in us or the planet.
Like blaming traffic jams on too many people, not on flawed city planning or reliance on cars.
Something like that, yeah. It also points out the contradiction of science boasting about solving problems while simultaneously being a major cause of destruction. The environmental crisis is cited as a prime example, a direct result of the relentless extraction of resources from deep within the earth, something enabled and celebrated by the scientific industrial age. And the way science views humans.
That's another key critique. The attempt to model human beings as just complex machines is seen as fundamentally flawed and ultimately unsuccessful, precisely because it ignores or dismisses consciousness, the Jeevan, which is the defining aspect of being human.
You can't understand a conscious being with a purely mechanistic model.
That's the argument. Machines are products of human intelligence, made from insentient material nature. They're inherently inferior to their conscious creators, and therefore cannot possibly study, understand, or define human beings in their totality. Applying a mechanistic view to humans is seen as detrimental, leading to instability, uncertainty, and a fundamentally dehumanizing perspective.
Okay, so education and science are critiqued.
Yeah.
What about the big isms, materialism and idealism? How do they fare?
The source finds both fundamentally lacking. It's fascinating because it rejects both major currents. Materialism, which it defines pretty straightforwardly as aiming for luxury, possession, sensory enjoyment, and idealism, which it sees as aiming for renunciation, devotion, maybe escape from the world towards some abstract ideal or deity.
Right. The critique is that both of these grand narratives fail. They fail to provide a definite, practical, workable outline for creating a truly just and orderly society here and now. And neither offers complete, continuous relief from human suffering and problems.
Why do both fail, despite seeming so different?
Because, the text argues, both ultimately lead to individualism. Materialism focuses on the individual's body, senses, possessions. Idealism focuses on the individual's soul, salvation, or relationship with the divine, often detached from worldly responsibility. Both perspectives, in their own way, contradict the fundamental reality of coexistence and the basis for social harmony, which requires understanding relationships and mutual fulfillment.
And it uses that example of cold water, right?
Yes, that simple but effective example to highlight the difference between just feeling good, which is temporary, subjective, sensory-based, and being good, which implies something universal, based on objective reality and understanding. Cold water might feel good to you if you're hot, sensory gratification. But it's not universally good. It could harm someone else or be wrong in another context. Sensory feeling just isn't a reliable guide for universal truth or right action.
Okay, and the critique doesn't stop there. What about the big institutions, state and religion?
They also come under scrutiny, but from a specific angle. They are portrayed primarily as frameworks designed to deal with deviation, with problems after they occur.
Dealing with criminals, essentially.
Right. They have mechanisms for punishment, for trying to reform those who break the rules, for managing conflict. But the text argues they fundamentally fail at the much more important task, showing ordinary, non-criminal people how to live wisely, how to live orderly, how to live honestly and fulfillingly in the first place. They focus on the negative, the deviation, not on establishing the positive foundation.
And constitutions, laws.
Viewed as power-centric rules, maybe designed to stop one kind of mistake, but often by creating loopholes for others, or by simply enforcing compliance through fear or incentive, rather than fostering genuine humane conduct based on understanding. They lack, the text argues, any real provision for enabling a truly humane way of living.
And trade. The economy.
Trade, as practiced under the current dominant model, is seen as fundamentally based on an obsession for profit. This, the text states flatly, directly contradicts the reality of coexistential harmony. If the goal is maximizing profit, it almost inevitably creates a less for one is more for the other dynamic. It builds in struggle, exploitation, and conflict at every level, from individual haggling to global economic disparities. So if you connect all these critiques together, the bigger picture that emerges is this overarching argument. The fundamental reason why all these prevalent systems, education, science, state, religion, trade, along with materialism and idealism, ultimately fail us.
Is because they're all built on shaky ground.
Exactly. They're built upon unwisdom, upon illusion, upon a profound lack of understanding of the fundamental reality of existence as coexistence and the true nature and purpose of the human being, the Jeevan. They operate from flawed assumptions about who we are, what reality is, and what truly constitutes happiness or fulfillment.
And the result is?
The result is systems that don't just fail to solve problems. They actively perpetuate conflict, exploitation, misery, and environmental destruction. They leave humankind, as the text puts it rather dramatically, buried under this ever-increasing pile of problems and the burden of lies, the accumulated untruths and illusions that we collectively live by.
Okay, so if the current systems are, as the text says, built on unwisdom and illusion, and they're leading us towards problems and destruction, what's the alternative? What's the way out?
The path presented is Jeevan Vidya. It literally translates as knowledge of living or the way of living for a human being. This is presented as the path towards wisdom. And wisdom in this context isn't just abstract intellectual knowledge, it's the practical understanding of existence as coexistence and understanding the true nature of the human being, Jeevan.
And this wisdom isn't just for personal enlightenment.
No, its purpose is very practical. It enables orderly living. It allows human beings to consciously, intelligently participate in the universal order that already characterizes the rest of existence, the material, bio, and animal orders.
Right, becoming complementary to the rest of nature, like you said earlier.
Exactly. And the source makes a really critical point about how we should value things, especially ourselves and our bodies, based on this understanding. It says, orderly living of human being requires that the valuation of Jeevan is done based on human purpose, and valuation of body is done based on its usefulness for that purpose.
So the conscious self, the Jeevan, is valued based on its purpose, understanding, and living in order. And the body.
The body's value is seen primarily in its usefulness for fulfilling that purpose. It's the necessary instrument for Jeevan to evidence its awakening, to express wisdom and interact within the human tradition. It's a means to the end of conscious evolution, not the end in itself. And what's fascinating is that this wisdom, this understanding, leads directly to a very clear definition of the purpose of human tradition itself, the collective goals we should be aiming for as a species.
Okay, what are those goals?
They're defined by achieving 4 interconnected aims, which are presented as the natural, inevitable outcome of living based on this understanding of coexistence. The first is resolution, samadhan. This means happiness, clarity, understanding, being free from contradiction and confusion within oneself.
Inner peace and understanding. Got it. Second.
Second is prosperity, samriddhi. But this is defined very specifically. It means having identified the needs of your family and having the means to produce or acquire more than those needs, ensuring fulfillment and security. It's not about limitless accumulation.
Prosperity as sufficiency plus surplus, not endless wealth. Third.
Third is trust. Abha. This means fearlessness in society. It's the feeling of mutual reliance, safety, knowing that others understand their relationships and won't exploit you. It's the basis of true community.
Trust and fearlessness. And the fourth.
Fourth is coexistential harmony, sahastitva. This is the ultimate outcome, living in order with nature, being complementary to the other orders and living in harmonious relationships with other human beings based on mutual understanding and fulfillment.
Resolution, prosperity, trust, coexistence. And these aren't just nice ideas, they're seen as the natural state achieved through living with wisdom.
That's the core proposal. And fundamental to achieving this orderly living are 3 pillars derived from that wisdom. Justice, nyaya, which is about recognizing and fulfilling relationships based on their inherent purpose. Dharma, which means living in alignment with the universal order, resulting in resolution or happiness. And truth, satya, which is the foundational understanding of existence as coexistence itself.
Okay, that's the goal. But how do we actually live this? What does it look like in practice?
The living expression of this wisdom is called humane conduct. This isn't just a set of rules, it's the natural outflow of understanding, and it comprises 3 interconnected aspects: values, character, and ethics.
Values, character, ethics. Let's break those down. What are values in this context?
Values here refer to the feelings and behaviors that arise naturally when we recognize the inherent purpose of human relationships, which is always mutual fulfillment. Examples given include feelings like motherliness or guardianship, trust, affection, gratitude, pride in mutual excellence, love, reverence, respect. These aren't imposed moral codes. They are the feelings that naturally arise and guide behavior when we understand our interconnectedness and strive for mutual happiness in relationships.
So they flow from understanding, not rules.
Exactly. And gratitude is specifically highlighted as a key starting point, recognizing all the help and contributions we constantly receive from others and from existence itself.
Okay, that's values. What about character?
Character relates to our conduct in 3 specific areas. First, righteous wealth, earning through meaningful contribution, not exploitation, and using wealth appropriately. Second, righteous conjugality, harmony, and mutual fulfillment within the family relationship. And third, kindness in our work and behavior towards all beings.
Righteous wealth, conjugality, kindness, And ethics.
Ethics is defined as the righteous use and conservation of our means of living. This includes our body, maintaining its health for its purpose, our mind, or Jeevan, using its faculties for understanding and right living, and our wealth, using resources responsibly and ensuring their regeneration. Living ethically in this way, the text says, naturally leads to that state of fearlessness or trust, abahai, because you're living in integrity with reality with others. And this framework also radically redefines some fundamental societal concepts, like justice.
Right. You mentioned justice earlier. How is it achieved here? It's not about courts and lawyers primarily.
No. The text critiques the court system as being based on fear of punishment and temptation of reward or loopholes, dealing with problems after deviation have occurred. It's judgment, not the establishment of justice. Instead, true justice is achieved within human relations themselves. It's based on a clear, understandable formula derived directly from the reality of coexistence: relation, values, valuation, and mutual fulfillment.
Relation, values, valuation, mutual fulfillment. Can you unpack that?
Sure. First, you have to recognize what is the inherent nature and purpose of this specific relationship. So it's you, parent-child, teacher-student, friend-friend, colleagues. Second, you live by the values appropriate to that relation. For example, guardianship and affection in parent-child, trust and respect between friends. Third, you evaluate the interactions based on whether those values are being expressed and fulfilled. And the goal, the outcome, is mutual fulfillment, ensuring that both parties in the relation experience happiness and satisfaction through the interaction.
So living according to that understanding is living with justice.
Yes. Constantly striving for mutual fulfillment in every interaction based on understanding the relation and its values is the very definition of living with justice in this framework.
Okay, and what about dharma? That's a word with a lot of baggage. How is it defined here?
Yeah, it's explicitly clarified that dharma here is not about sectarian rituals, specific religious beliefs, or particular cultural traditions in the way it's often used. In Jeevan Vidya, dharma simply means living in alignment with the universal order of existence, the reality of coexistence. It's about conforming to the inherent nature of things.
And the result of living in dharma is?
Resolution. Continuous happiness. Because you're living in sync with reality, not fighting against it or living in illusion. Dharma is described as the inherent progressiveness towards happier living, aligning oneself with the natural order.
And how is this order lived out in society?
It's lived through conscious participation in 5 key dimensions of human organization and behavior. 1. Education and sanskar. Teaching this, understanding the natural laws, regulation, balance, justice, dharma, truth, right from childhood. 2. Justice and security. Living and organizing society based on justice in relationships, which naturally ensures fearlessness and security for everyone. 3. Production and work. Engaging in work with the aim of producing more than your family needs, contributing to collective prosperity. 4. Trade and banking. Engaging exchange based on principles of righteous use and conservation, ensuring mutual benefit, not based on profit obsession. 5. Health and discipline. Swasthya sanya. Understanding the body's needs and maintaining health through discipline guided by wisdom, not just reacting to symptoms.
Wow. So if you take that all together, this framework stemming from that core understanding of coexistence in Jeevan, it really does offer a comprehensive, internally consistent alternative to all the systems it critiques.
It absolutely does. It presents a complete worldview and a way of life.
Yeah.
And the core argument is that all the problems we face, conflict, poverty, unhappiness, environmental destruction, they aren't inherent flaws in the universe or in us. They stem directly from our disconnection from this natural order, from living based on unwisdom and illusion.
So the solution lies in reconnecting with that order.
Precisely. By understanding this reality coexistence, Jeevan, humane conduct, and choosing to live within this universal order, guided by wisdom, the text proposes that humankind can fundamentally resolve these deep-seated problems and achieve not just individual happiness, but universal harmony among humans, and crucially, harmony between humans and the rest of nature, finally becoming complementary to the material, bio, and animal orders around us.
Okay, so this fundamental shift in understanding has some really practical, down-to-earth implications for how we live, right? It's not just theory.
Absolutely. The text outlines concrete alternatives to current practices across many areas.
Like the economy, for example. You mentioned trade based on profit is flawed. What's the alternative?
The alternative proposed is an economy based on what's called cyclical economics. The idea is to use resources righteously, according to their purpose, within the natural cycles of the 4 orders, material, bio, animal, human, rather than just accumulating them obsessively beyond any real need.
Cyclical economics. meaning respecting natural cycles.
Yes, and understanding that hoarding resources often just leads to them spoiling or decaying anyway, which shows a lack of understanding of their nature. True prosperity, in this view, isn't measured by how much wealth you hoard or how much profit you make by exploiting others or nature.
It's measured by.
It's defined very specifically, producing more than the needs of your family. First, you identify the actual physical needs of your family unit. Then you engage in productive work to meet those needs, aiming for a surplus.
And having that surplus is prosperity.
Yes, achieving that sufficiency plus surplus is the feeling of prosperity. This approach makes human needs finite, defined by the family, rather than infinite, driven by desire or comparison. And achieving this within the family unit facilitates harmonious living internally and creates the capacity to contribute that surplus to the wider society and the natural environment. And what's fascinating here is how this directly challenges some core assumptions of modern economics that we often just accept.
Like what?
Well, the source critiques current economics for often demeaning the act of production itself, suggesting that actually making things is somehow less valuable than, say, trading financial instruments or managing logistics.
Right. The focus shifts away from the creation of real value.
Exactly. It also criticizes the extreme emphasis on specialization that we see everywhere today. The claim is that hyperspecialization actually destroys the inherent broad productive tendencies and skills present in human beings, making people overly dependent and less capable overall.
Interesting. Specialization seen as a weakness in some ways.
In the sense that it disconnects people from the holistic process of providing for needs and makes society more vulnerable and complex. This disconnect, devaluing production while overemphasizing profit and specialization, is seen as a root cause of conflict and exploitation. It creates systems where those who contribute less tangible value can demand more resources.
And the family unit is key here.
Yes, the text firmly positions the family, not the individual or the state or a corporation, as the fundamental, definitive unit for ascertaining real human needs and, crucially, for experiencing genuine prosperity, the feeling of having enough and more which arises from producing to meet those needs directly.
Okay, that's economics. What about health? You mentioned health and discipline, swasthya sanyam. How does this view change our approach to health?
It emphasizes a more holistic understanding. True health, in this view, involves recognizing the body's own inherent intelligence and capacity for healing. The body isn't just a machine, it's a self-regulating system, constantly striving for balance and health. There's a natural wisdom within it.
So diagnosis isn't just about machines and tests.
Not solely, no. While tools can be useful, a deeper diagnosis involves understanding the patient holistically, listening carefully, understanding their state of mind, since Jeevan influences the body, recognizing the subtle signals the body itself is giving through things like pulse, observation, etc. Because fundamentally, the body knows how to heal itself.
So the practitioner's role is more supportive.
Yes, to assist and support that natural, intelligent healing process, rather than just intervening aggressively or viewing the body as a faulty machine needing external fixing. There's also a critique of excessive specialization in medicine, which can lead to a fragmented view of the person, losing sight of the whole being. And it questions the practice of charging huge amounts without necessarily providing better results or addressing the root causes of illness, which, according to Jeevan Vidya, often stem from disordered living based on unwisdom stress, poor diet, lack of purpose, etc. The core idea is that the fundamental knowledge for healing is inherent in the body itself, and health comes from living in alignment with that natural order.
Okay, so this framework presents a powerful alternative across the board. But given how entrenched the current systems are, how deep the unwisdom runs, how does the text suggest we actually shift towards this? How does change happen?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? How do we get from here to there? The source is very clear that this transformation isn't something that can be imposed from the outside, through force or new laws or revolutions in the usual sense.
So it's not about overthrowing the old systems.
Not directly. The transformation comes fundamentally from within the individual. It starts with understanding, grasping the reality of coexistence and the nature of Jeevan. And then it involves evidencing that understanding in one's own life through humane conduct, in one's behavior and interactions.
Change starts with individual understanding and living.
Yes. And the primary vehicle for enabling this transformation on a larger scale is seen as education, but not the current education system.
Right, that needs to be humanized first.
Exactly. Education needs to be fundamentally reformed, humanized, so that it transmits this wisdom, the reality of coexistence, the nature of Jeevan, the principles of humane conduct, making this understanding accessible to everyone, right from childhood.
And what does that kind of education lead to in individuals?
It leads naturally to self-reliance, not just materially, but intellectually and emotionally. And it fosters the development of what the text calls the 6 core capabilities needed for humane living. Self-confidence, based on understanding one's purpose and potential. Respect for human excellence, recognizing the potential for wisdom in all others. Balance in talent and personality, aligning one's skills and abilities with humane character. Social in behavior, interacting justly based on understanding relationships. Self-sustainability in occupation, engaging in productive work that fulfills needs. And living in coexistence with nature, harmony with the environment.
And the text is pretty blunt about the stakes involved here, isn't it? What happens if we don't make this shift, if we continue on the current path driven by unwisdom?
It's starkly clear, yes. The current path, based on illusion and exploitation, is described as leading inexorably towards destruction. Not just social chaos, or more suffering, but potentially the actual annihilation of the human race from the earth.
That's alarming. Does it give specific examples?
It does. It points directly to the severe consequences of environmental damage that were already becoming apparent when the text was written, and are even more obvious now. Things like rising global temperatures caused by digging deep into the earth for coal and petroleum, described graphically as tearing into the planet's core, disrupting natural balance. And widespread water crises resulting from destroying the environmental cover, like forests and wetlands, that regulate water cycles.
So these aren't abstract future threats, but direct consequences of actions driven by ignorance of the natural order.
Precisely. They're presented as the logical, unavoidable outcome of living out of sync with the fundamental reality of coexistence, treating the planet as a resource to be endlessly exploited rather than a living system we are part of. So if you connect that warning to the proposed solution, the whole framework of Jeevan Vidya is presented not just as a nice philosophy or a better way to live,
but as something essential for survival.
Exactly. It's framed as a necessary course correction for humankind, an urgent need based on the reality of our current trajectory. It's seen as the only real chance to stop the crimes against Earth that have been committed out of ignorance, and to establish a sustainable, crimeless, orderly way of living based on understanding coexistence.
And those practical environmental solutions mentioned later, like using river energy, vegetable oils, solar.
Yes, those are offered as concrete examples of how living with this understanding could manifest practically. They illustrate a shift toward using resources available on the surface of the Earth, resources that are part of ongoing natural cycles, working with nature's flows, rather than destructive extraction from the planet's core. This fundamental shift in our relationship with energy and resources is portrayed as absolutely essential for the very survival and continued flourishing of human life on this planet.
So ultimately, what is the goal here? What's the end game of this path of Jeevan Vidya? Is it enlightenment in the traditional sense?
The goal is described as awakening. It's the journey from the state of unfulfillment, which the text suggests is the default human condition when living in illusion and ignorance, to a state of continuous fulfillment, which is achieved through wisdom and living in order with existence.
Awakening from unfulfillment to fulfillment through wisdom. And how does that process work?
It's presented as a clear, natural progression. It starts with study engaging with the description of reality presented in this framework. This leads to understanding, the direct intellectual grasping of the truth of coexistence, the nature of Jeevan, and the principles of humane conduct.
Study leads to understanding. Then what?
Understanding then develops into conviction, Sankalp, a firm belief, a commitment, a resolve based on that clear understanding. It's not blind faith, it's belief rooted in comprehension.
Understanding leads to conviction, and the final step.
The culmination is realizing, Anubhav, these truths directly in one's own being, experiencing the reality of coexistence, the nature of oneself as Jeevan, not just intellectually, but as a lived reality. That's the state of full awakening. And what's really interesting here is how realization, Anubhav, is described. It's not presented as some abstract mystical state that takes you out of the world or makes you disconnected from others.
No. How is it presented then?
It's presented as the very basis for living with complete authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, it's the basis for being able to effectively impart understanding to others. Someone who has realized doesn't just know, they can express and explain the reality in a way that helps others understand too.
So realization leads to sharing.
Naturally.
Yeah.
The text talks about realization leading to the celebration of man, a state of deep inherent joy, contentment, and inner clarity that just bubbles up as a result of living in tune with reality. And from that state, There arises a natural, unforced desire to share this understanding, to help others awaken.
And that's where upcar comes in, benefaction.
Exactly. Upcar, helping others awaken, is presented not as a duty or a moral obligation or sacrifice. It's seen as a spontaneous, natural outflow of one's own awakening and fulfillment. It connects back to those ideas of finite needs and cyclical economics. When you understand reality, your needs become definite, you achieve prosperity, surplus, and the natural inclination is to use that surplus, both material and intellectual, to contribute to the well-being and awakening of others. You circulate understanding and resources, you don't hoard them.
Now, the source seems particularly strong on one point. It really challenges the whole idea that we need saviors, or that external authorities or institutions are going to fix things for us.
Yes, it's quite emphatic about that. It states pretty bluntly that the prevalent traditions, education, religion, state, and trade as they currently exist are essentially rotten frameworks.
Rotten frameworks? That sounds harsh. Does it mean the people in them are rotten?
No, and that's a crucial distinction the text makes later. The critique is aimed at the structures themselves, the underlying assumptions and operating principles of these institutions. They are seen as rotten because they inherently lack the capacity for self-reformation from within.
Why can't they reform themselves?
Because they are built upon fundamental illusions about reality and the human being. Their very design, their core logic, perpetuates the problems rather than resolving them at the root. Trying to fix these systems incrementally from within is seen as ultimately futile, like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, because the foundation itself is flawed. You can't get to true resolution starting from illusion. But, and this is absolutely critical, that critique of the frameworks leads to a vital question. If the traditions and systems are rotten, does that mean the people produced by them, shaped by them, are also inherently rotten or beyond hope?
And the answer is...
The answer from the source is a resounding, emphatic, and very hopeful no. This is perhaps one of the most optimistic points in Jeevan Vidya. The text asserts that every single human being, regardless of their background, their culture, the flawed traditions they were raised in, or the mistakes they've made, possesses an innate, fundamental inquiry for their own reformation, an inherent drive towards truth, towards understanding, towards happiness.
An innate desire to be better, to understand.
Yes, this inherent potential, this deep-seated longing to understand and live rightly, means that every human being is, as the text puts it, more than 51% right, fundamentally. They are inherently capable of becoming wise and living in an orderly way.
So the potential is always there, under the surface.
Always. Which means the focus of Jeevan Vidya isn't on trying to dismantle or reform the rigid, flawed external traditions themselves. They're seen as resistant to fundamental change anyway. The focus is entirely on opening the eyes of human being.
Enabling individuals to see the truth for themselves.
Exactly. Enabling each person to access their own innate potential for understanding, to grasp the reality of coexistence, and to start living in the natural order. The idea is that society transforms organically from the ground up, one awakened individual at a time, not by fixing broken systems from the top down, but by empowering individuals to live beyond the influence of those flawed systems through their own understanding.
And within that context, even the whole concept of development gets completely reframed, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It challenges the dominant materialistic definition head-on.
So development isn't about building more roads or increasing GDP per capita or even building more prisons to manage the fallout of disorder.
No. According to Jeevan Vidya, true development is the development of human consciousness itself. It's the process of humans moving from unwisdom to wisdom, which then naturally leads to orderly living.
And how does that manifest outwardly?
It manifests as the humanization of education, so wisdom can be transmitted effectively. It manifests as the emergence of a family-based self-organizing social order founded on justice, relationships, and mutual fulfillment, rather than centralized control or competition.
And the ultimate measure of this true development?
The ultimate measure is its capacity to halt the destruction of the earth and enable humans to live in sustainable harmony with nature and with each other. This is a stark contrast to purely materialistic definitions of development, which can easily coexist with, or even arise from, a mechanistic, unwise worldview focused on external accumulation and control, a path that often leads to more problems and continued environmental damage, even while boasting of progress. So if we really connect all the threads back to the core, the source asserts again and again, based on its fundamental understanding of existence, that the persistent, seemingly intractable problems humanity faces — conflict, war, exploitation, poverty, misery, environmental catastrophe — they don't arise from some external evil force or a punishing God or some inherent, inescapable depravity in human nature. They stem directly from human illusion, from unwisdom, from a fundamental lack of understanding about the nature of existence, about ourselves as conscious beings, Jeevan, and about our inherent place within the perfectly ordered system of coexistence.
So the solution isn't external, it's internal. A shift in understanding.
Precisely. The proposed solution, the path of Jeevan Vidya, is presented as that fundamental shift. Not just tweaking our actions or policies on the surface, but transforming our core understanding and our entire way of living, rooting it firmly in the perceived, undeniable reality of coexistence and the intelligent, conscious nature of Jeevan.
And this path, this potential for awakening and living in order, it's available to everyone.
That's the ultimate message of hope here. It's presented as being inherently available to every single human being right now, regardless of their past mistakes, their cultural background, their level of education, or the flawed traditions they may have been subjected to. The potential for understanding and orderly living lies within.
So we've really taken a deep dive today into Jeevan Vidya. We've explored a perspective that profoundly critiques so many of our modern assumptions, doesn't it? Assumptions about knowledge itself, the role of science, how society should function through state and religion, the goals of our economy, and even our own fundamental identity and purpose as human beings.
It really does challenge the status quo across the board. And it presents this alternative vision, a universe that is fundamentally ordered and based on coexistence. It defines us, human beings, not just as physical bodies, but as these conscious entities, Jeevan, distinct from the body.
And it proposes that true, continuous happiness, real resolution to our problems, it doesn't come from chasing external things or following rigid traditions blindly, but actually from understanding this inherent reality and then living in accordance with what it calls humane conduct.
Yeah, and we saw how this view really challenges those endless, often contradictory pursuits of both materialism chasing possessions and pleasure and idealism, perhaps seeking escape or abstract salvation. It points instead towards fulfilling what it says is our innate human desire for wisdom, for justice in our relationships, and for harmony, both with each other and with the natural world.
And it offers practical implications too, touching pretty much every area of life: how we educate children, how we organize our economies, how we view health, and maybe most crucially today, our relationship with the environment.
I think the central idea, maybe the most hopeful one that comes through, is that the deep-seated problems we face, they aren't inevitable. They're not hardwired into existence or into us. They stem, according to this text, from our current collective state of unwisdom, from living under illusions about reality.
But the flip side, the good news, is that every single human being, according to this perspective, inherently has the potential and even an innate inquiry, a drive to become wise and to live in this natural, orderly way. The capacity is within us.
And that understanding leads us to, I think, a really compelling question for you, for everyone listening, to perhaps reflect on. If the possibility of resolving human problems, of achieving genuine, continuous happiness, and living in harmony with existence and each other is truly inherent within each and every one of us, as this text so strongly proposes, what is it really that prevents us from recognizing and realizing that potential right now?
Something to think about, definitely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Jeevan Vidya. We really hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights, some nuggets to chew on, and maybe even sparked your own inquiry into these incredibly profound questions about life, about existence, and ultimately about what it truly means to be human.